Hello and welcome back to another cozy Saturday here in the Coriander Quilt studio. I am so excited to have all of you joining me here today. We have a fun video planned. I'm finally getting around to doing something with you all that I've wanted to do for probably years. So today is the day we're kicking off a new fun series, and I've got a great lineup of viewer quilts, so stick around. All right, let's dive into these viewer quilts. First, from Cindy P. She says, for Christmas 2024, I wanted to make my two kids and their spouses each their own Christmas quilt throws. I was so excited when I saw your Starberry line and was able to make each of their quilts with their own unique patterns, backings, and backgrounds. Each couple had theirs bound with the same print. I used 4 patterns from the Simply Half Yard Quilt Book by It's So Emma. I also used a different quilting pattern for each of them. They all loved them and the fabrics really were perfect. Thank you for your creativity and beautiful fabric designs. Best wishes. Loved seeing those, Cindy. It's so fun to see how different each of those quilts looked using the same fabric line. I think that's a really neat aspect of fabric lines, is just by picking and choosing different fabrics, you can go from something that might look predominantly spring to something that looks fall to something that looks winter. The same fabric line can look so different depending on the fabrics that you choose for the quilts. And this is a great example of that in action. So thank you so much for sharing those. And also, well done having all 4 quilts done all at the same time and ready to gift in time for the holidays. I know that in and of itself is quite an accomplishment. Next up, from Alina, this was fun to see because this is another quilt made using that same book that Cindy mentioned, the Simply Half Yards book by It's So Emma. She says, hello Corey and Nicole. I just wanted to share this quilt I finished binding on a recent camping trip. It is made with Prairie fabrics and a solid gray. I was so excited when I stumbled across a quilt shop online that actually still had this line. It is made in the Legacy pattern from the Simply Half Yards book from Fat Quarter Shop. The backing is from Lulu Lane, which I happened across in my stash. So exciting when we find a treasure we forgot we had. Plus, a blender type piece to make it the right size. I so enjoy working with your fabrics and look forward to each line. I might even stalk Fat Quarter Shop website on the month they are coming out because I sure don't want to miss getting some. Anyways, thanks for designing great fabrics and the Saturday videos. Your quilty friend, Alina. So much fun to see. You know I love a dark background on a quilt, and I thought that looked so pretty. I loved seeing them in Prairie fabrics. I really thought that was fun to share this with you right now because In the Garden is a follow-up collection to Prairie, and In the Garden fabrics are just now hitting quilt shops. So if you missed out on Prairie, it came out over 10 years ago. So you may very well have missed out on getting Prairie. You have a second chance with In the Garden fabrics. So thank you so much for sharing that, Alina. From Jennifer H. Hello, Nicole and Corey. I absolutely love your fabrics and patterns. Piecing is my favorite part of the quilt process, so I have many unfinished tops in my stash. I finally got around to free motion quilting my Flyaway Blackbird quilt top on my Longarm. I am a novice Longarmer, and this was my first edge-to-edge floral design. I think this turned out beautifully, and my quilt guild also loved it during our show and tell today. I fully enjoyed every step of the quilt process with this quilt. Also, my favorite color is yellow. I am looking forward to seeing more and more from Coriander Quilts. Yay, another yellow lover. It's so funny when I talk to people, either it seems they love yellow or they have a strong dislike for yellow. I very seldom hear people say, oh, I'm a little bit ambivalent towards yellow. So I'm right there with you with a love of yellow. The warmer and butterier, the better. Just a happy color to work with in quilts. So I enjoyed seeing this as well from you, Jennifer. Thank you so much to all of you that sent these projects in for me to share today. I always love being able to share those with all of you. We're just going to move right into this next little project that I mentioned right at the beginning of the video. What I have been wanting to do for quite a while and just haven't had the time is to start sharing tutorial videos when I have a new fabric line come out into quilt shops for all of the quilt patterns that I released with that fabric line shown. So as I mentioned, In the Garden fabrics are just now arriving into quilt shops. So now over the next, hopefully a few weeks, hopefully it's not too long, I want to share a tutorial video for the patterns that I released within the garden. Now, with that being said, I have shared tutorial videos for previous patterns, and I've done them as midweek videos, usually a Wednesday, and that's my plan again for this new round of tutorials. They're going to be standalone individual tutorials in addition to my regular Saturday videos every week. The thing is, when I do these midweek videos, YouTube does a horrible job at letting my current subscribers know that there's an extra video being released that week. It sees that you watch the videos on Saturdays or Sundays, and so a Wednesday video pops up and it thinks you have no interest in seeing a Wednesday video. So if you don't want to miss out on these midweek videos, you're going to want to make sure that you're subscribed to the channel. I know that not everybody likes to subscribe, but this is one time where it's advantageous because it will allow you to not miss out on those videos if that's something that you're interested in. Otherwise, you're probably never going to know that they even came out because that's what's happened previously. So the first one I'm starting with is Brookside. This is what the Brookside pattern cover looks like. This is a charm pack quilt. I would have showed all of the In the Garden quilts in the In the Garden trunk show, so I will link to that so you can kind of know what tutorials I'm starting with. Ideally, I would like to continue doing this going forward and hopefully kind of backtrack for some of the previous patterns that I've released so that we have a really nice log of tutorial videos that when you purchase my patterns, you have this wonderful video tutorial to go along with it, just as an extra bonus. I do a lot of free content where I am doing free tutorials and free things, but I also like to support those of you that are purchasing from me and purchasing my patterns. So this is one way that I can do that. So Brookside is where we are starting at, and I'm going to show you this quilt. Hold this up for you so that you can see what this looks like. This is a fairly simple quilt to piece. These blocks are smaller blocks. They finish at, well, not smaller, but they finish at 8 inches. So a little bit smaller if you're used to working with 12-inch blocks, but not a lot of pieces in that 8-inch block. And we are just going to piece it together today so that if you, let me show this to you here, so that if you want to make one of these quilts, you could certainly dive in and do so. So there is one of the blocks that we are going to be making. So because you need the pattern to go with this tutorial, I'm not going to be giving measurements, but if you have purchased one of my patterns previously, you know that it includes great measurements as you work your way down through the pattern. Okay, so what I have done is I have cut out the pieces that I need for one block. And the way this pattern is written, you have your block diagram here on page number 2. You can see all of the pieces that you need to create one block. And as we are working our way down through the pattern is written such that you can make one block. Make sure you understand how everything is going together. Make sure you've got your pieces all cut accurately, and then you're ready to go with chain piecing the blocks from there on out. And what fabrics I've chosen some Tilda fabrics because my plan is to continue doing these tutorials, of course, and then I'm going to use all Tilda fabrics when I'm showing these tutorials so that I could, if I want to, put all of these blocks into a fun Tilda sampler quilt at some point in time. It's not going to be super fast progress, but I do have a little bit of a plan in place. I am not going to be using one specific Tilda fabric line. It's going to be a mix of lines working my way from block to block. I am going to use a consistent background. This background fabric that I've chosen is Moda Solid. It's in the color Natural, and the number on it is 9912. And again, that is the color Natural. This is also the same color that I've been using for my Tilda Callie & Co. mystery blocks. I know I've been asked and I've answered a number of times what that solid color is. So if you were one that asked and didn't see the response to your question, 9912, and the color is Natural, and it is a Moda Solid. And I think it works really nicely with the Tilda fabrics pretty much across the board. I haven't seen all of the fabrics in person, but all of the ones that I have, I like this color with those fabrics. So I think it works great. So that is my plan, a mix of Tilda fabric lines, the natural Motivella solid for the background, and hopefully a whole bunch of fun, scrappy blocks that I can use in a sampler style quilt sometime down the road. So let's get piecing on this block. The first thing you can see is we need to choose a matching set of 4 print A squares. Those are going to be what you see in orange here in your pattern. And I have chosen this Tilda print, which I just love for this portion of the block. I'm gonna have to give that little fella a little press before I piece. If I have any piecing or any fabrics that are like this, creased, that I may have cut prior to pressing, I always press them out before I start piecing. So I'll give that little fellow a press, and ideally you are pressing before you are cutting your fabrics so that you don't run into that. Sometimes I just don't do things in the right order. My C is this natural colored fabric right here. And we are going to be sewing pieces A, C, and then A together as we see here in step 2. Now, what I have blacked out shows you what these units will measure. I always tell people, go ahead and measure your units after each step so that you know everything is measuring as it should. I'm going to go ahead and get these units sewn together and be right back. We have 2 little pairs of completed units. These were both pressed to the center, like so. And now we are going to sew D in between these 2. Now, it's going to go like this. We're going to sew all of those together. When we have something like this that we need to sew together, where it's easy to get these a little bit askew because we don't have that center piece where we can nest our seams, what I like to do is first sew onto the one side. Get this all nice and tidy and sewn and pressed. Press that. You can see here we're pressing to the center, so press to the center, and then add that second piece on, because that's going to give me a little bit more visual help with making sure that these seams get matched up. I'm going to go over to my sewing machine and sew and press just this one side, and then I can show you that just a little bit better. So here is what we are working with now. And ideally, we want a nice straight line across when we sew all of these pieces together here. But we don't have any seams to line up with on this unit right here. So what I like to do is just get everything lined up here, and then I can see how these seams are running in comparison to the strips here on this side. And that's going to keep things straight. If these seams are butting right where they should be, I'll just go ahead and pin, and I'm real happy with that. I'm just going to go ahead and pin on either side of those seams there, and then go over to my machine, sew that up, and that should line up pretty nicely with how I want it to. All right, and here is what that little unit looks like now, from the front and then the pressing on the back. I went ahead and pulled this quilt back up because I thought we could just take another gander at this, because I didn't pin when I made these blocks. If you've been around here for any length of time, you know I am not a pinner. I am not pinning unless I need to. Something like this is a time when I might, but when I made this whole quilt, I did not. So I just wanted to show you how it might look if you don't pin. And there is nothing wrong with not pinning, and it's still going to tend to turn out pretty nicely, especially when something is quilted. But I always, I like to say it only needs to be as perfect as it needs to be for you. So pin or not pin, but have fun sewing, whichever way you decide to do. So here's this block here, not as neat and tidy maybe as this block, but still, you know, lines up pretty nicely. I know there are some in here that don't line up as nicely as they could, but I am not in the least bit bothered by that. So just know that you can be as fussy or as non-fussy as you want to be when you are piecing your blocks. There's no rules for how perfect a quilt has to be. You just need to be happy and enjoy yourself during the process. So here are some non-pin blocks, just so you know that you don't have to pin. I like to always mention that. It's nice to know these tips and tricks that can help us improve our accuracy, but sometimes it's just as important to remind ourselves that it doesn't need to be super accurate. It can be unpinned and it can be just fine. All right, so there is our little center. The next thing that we need to do is make our half square triangles. You're going to see that happening here in step number 4. We are using B's and E's to make a total of 8 half square triangles. You are going to see your cutting measurements listed here in the pattern as you work your way through. So I am going to get these marked, grab a pencil and a little marking tool over here. I really like these OmniGrid marking tools. I use these a lot. I also, you heard me chat about my little June Taylor ruler. I use that too to mark these lines. I am going to go ahead and mark. I have the diagonal seam tape, which I like using too when I want to be fast. Diagonal seam tape is faster than marking everything, but sometimes it's really nice just to have the lines marked. So I use a lot of different methods depending on how quick something needs to be done, how accurate I need something to be. I do have good luck with the diagonal seam tape. I have a tutorial for it here on the channel, so I'll link to that if you're not familiar with that product. I do have good luck with accuracy with that, especially since I like to do oversized half square triangles and trim down. But not everyone likes it. So it's great having a bunch of different options that we can use when we are piecing our units. So for this one, I am marking my sewing lines, and then I'm going to be pairing those with my B squares, right sides together. I'm going to sew on both of those marked sewing lines. I did opt to mark the sewing lines as opposed to marking the cut line. That's also a method you could use. I could have marked the diagonal from corner to corner and then sewn a 1/4 inch away from both sides of that marked line, but I opted to mark my sewing line. And I'm going to pair these together and get these half square triangles made. My 8 half square triangle units are now cut. These are pressed toward the darker fabric. And you should use whatever trimming method you like best for half square triangles. I used my block ruler this time around. That ruler is slowly growing on me. I didn't use it as much when I very first got it, but I've been reaching for it more often. It's not the only one I use. I have some other favorites too, but that's what I use today. So I've got 8 half square triangles trimmed down to the size listed in step number 5. I've made all 8, so I am now ready for step number 7, which is telling me to sew 2 half square triangles together and 1 background F rectangle. So we are going to place F in between 2 of these half square triangles. Let me get you oriented the right way. Yes. And like this. So we are going to make 4 units like this, and these get pressed towards that center rectangle. Here's what these look like, and then the pressing on the back. We are now ready to move to step 8, and I am going to do step 8 and step 9 at the same time here. So what we need to do is we're going to sew 2 of these units to the sides of our center. And then the other 2, we're going to sew G squares to the sides. So that will be in the 4 corners here. So we'll sew these units together, and then these units together. And then in step 10, we're just going to complete the block then by sewing all 3 of these rows together. And here she is, one completed Brookside quilt block, looking just adorable in those Tilda fabrics. So that's the front, and then the pressing there on the back. So that turned out super cute. It's also fun seeing it in a different fabric line in the garden versus the Tildas. I'm partial to both. I think they're both just really pretty. So this is what it will look like once you've completed it. The patterns are available over in my Etsy shop for sale. I have them in paper or PDF formats. In the garden fabrics, which I showed you in this quilt earlier. These fabrics are in quilt shops now. I don't sell any fabrics over in my Etsy shop. Typically, I like to support quilt shops and allow them to do that for me. So you can purchase In the Garden fabrics in your favorite quilt shop. This is one of my favorite prints from the In the Garden fabric line. That's the backing I used for this Brookside quilt. I just love that print. And then again, the front of Brookside. But you can see how pretty this would be in a different fabric line. Now, if you want to stay updated when I release those midweek tutorials, I would love to have you subscribe. I think it's going to be the best way for you to be able to not miss out on those. And if you have some of my previous patterns, ones from years ago, that you would like to see tutorials released for, I've done some of them over the years. And I'd like to continue doing so, but my focus is going to be on patterns as they release going forward. But you know, if you have ones from previous releases that you're interested in tutorials for, please let me know down in the comments so I can have that information tucked in my head. If you have any questions, let me know. I hope you have a wonderful week. If you are celebrating Thanksgiving here in the United States, I hope you have a wonderful Thanksgiving celebration. We have a couple get-togethers that we'll be going to with family, and I'm looking forward to those. So that will be fun for us. It's always nice when we can have family together. So that will be a special treat coming up this week. Of course, lots of good food. Speaking of food, I have vegetable soup cooking upstairs, and if you heard any tummy grumbles, that's why, because it is smelling so good down here. It is kind of cold and dreary outside, and we're having vegetable soup and sourdough bread for supper, and I am looking forward to that. So I thank you so much for stopping by, and I will catch you again next time.